It's like if you unfortunately have a disease that you knew was out there but never thought about, you're suddenly aware about what a terrible disease it is. And that's the way I experienced the Electoral College, a terrible disease on American democracy.
Because of the Electoral College, presidential candidates serve themselves best if they work to build coalitions and if they try to appeal to a wide variety of people.
The Electoral College sets up a system where every vote is not equal.
I don't have a problem with the Electoral College itself. I actually think the Electoral College serves a purpose and is valuable. But the winner-take-all rule really has a perverted effect both on politics and policy.
The history of majority rule in the U.S. is not always a good one.
You have 538 people that elect the president. Do you really want 538 24-year-old Michael BACAs electing the president? That's kind of dangerous.
We're going to cast our 20 electoral votes for Pennsylvania today for Joe Biden. Hello, hey, good morning, good morning. And I'm excited to go in there and officially nominate him to receive our electoral votes. And I think today is proof positive that our democracy will endure. And it'll endure because people came out, they voted, and now those votes are going to be counted and going to be respected. Okay.
And you raise your right hand for me. Do you and each of you solemnly swear or affirm that you will support, obey, and defend?
In accordance with the provisions of the Constitution and the laws of the United States and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, do now proceed to the ballot for President of the United States. And in the actual forum where the Electoral College will take place, irrespective of who you voted for, this is a moment that reaffirms our democracy. And now the process, as outlined in our Constitution, moves forward. The Electoral College sets up a system where every vote is not equal. And a vote in one place is more important than a vote somewhere else. That's unfair. The presidency is the only job where we know who won the most votes, and yet we're sitting around for days and weeks asking who's going to win. Now, having been an elector, I feel even more confident that we could do without this and that we could have a system by which person gets the most vote wins.
Polls are closed in half of the states across America. Joining them in just a few moments, Arkansas. And we want to check back in on Georgia, North Carolina, and Ohio. They are part of our notable 9 states that will help decide this election.
This is 6 electoral votes in Nevada, 11 in Arizona. That's 17.
Joe Biden has an edge in enough states, enough leaning blue states right now, to get him over the magic 270 electoral vote.
Mr. Biden is the winner of the state of Pennsylvania, capturing its 20 electoral votes.
The Electoral College has always garnered a bit of attention. That's because it's frankly very difficult to understand. There are these 538 presidential electors, and they are divided among the states based on roughly their population. When we go to vote for the president in November, that vote is not actually for the president. We're voting for who is going to be presidential electors, who after the election will go on to choose the president. Because we rely on the Electoral College and not the popular vote, those two things can be at odds. It is possible that I can win more votes than you, and the Electoral College will still award you the presidency.
Thank you, dear friends. I am humbled by this nomination.
People ask me, how do you feel about the 2000 campaign? And I always said, I loved every moment of it until election night.
The presidential race is still holding the nation's attention tonight, with George Bush leading Al Gore by 300 votes in Florida.
But there are still more votes to be counted, challenges to be made, and legal battles to be fought.
I knew from the beginning when I was selected that it was going to be a close election. And then that led to the 36-day litigation about a recount in Florida. The profound inequity of 500 votes in Florida determining that we would not be president and vice president, even though we had carried the popular vote by more than 500,000 votes, that built up in me after this was all over. You know, I went back to the Senate. I was involved in a lot in foreign policy and national security. I would travel to other countries. Foreign dignitaries would come and visit me. And the question that I was asked more than any other, how could Al Gore and you get the most votes in this greatest democracy in the world, and still you didn't get elected because of the votes of 535 people? That's a hard one to explain. But really the primary devil there was this institution of America's government, the Electoral College. And for a lot of people who had supported Al Gore and me, I think it made George Bush an illegitimate president from the beginning, and frankly made his job harder as president. And that was a consequence of the Electoral College. It's like if you unfortunately have a disease that you knew was out there but never thought about, and suddenly you get it, you're suddenly aware about what a terrible disease it is, you know? And that's the way I experienced the Electoral College. A terrible disease on American democracy.
When we talk about the framers, it's important to cut them some slack. There's no obvious precedent for the institution they were creating. So the convention basically thought about choosing the president. There are three basic methods. You could have the president elected by Congress. You could have the president elected by the people at large. You could have the president elected by the system of state-based electors we eventually wound up with. Let's start with popular election. If you have a single constituency, you're going to have a big regional disadvantage for the South. Why? Because a big part of the Southern population consists of African-American slaves who have no political existence whatever. I think the second and more important objection was that the framers believed, I think quite plausibly, that it would be hard to identify truly national characters. If you have Congress elect the president, by definition, nobody can be better informed across the whole nation than members of Congress. I mean, by definition, they are your national political elite. The problem with that is if you have congressional election, then the president will become, in their terms, the lackey or the tool, the toady of Congress. And the upshot is the system of having presidential electors became attractive, not because anyone really understood how it was going to work, because they didn't. It became the final choice, not because it was attractive in itself, but because it was the least unattractive option.
Fair Vote is a nonpartisan organization that seeks to reform elections to provide greater choice and more voice for voters. For us, that means really looking at the structural challenges to voting in the United States. The current system that dominates most states, right, is the winner-take-all rule, right? So that every state had a popular vote for president, and almost all of them gave all of their electoral votes to the candidate that won the vote in that state. Ultimately, what that has led to is most states are essentially writing their ticket to not being relevant.
I've been reading about what's going on in Virginia.
Because of the winner-take-all rule, the division between states is not based on whether they're small or big, it's based on whether they're closely contested or not. So a small state that isn't contested essentially counts the same as a big state that isn't contested, as essentially worthless, right? From a voter's perspective, from the perspective of whether your participation matters, it really only matters in about a dozen states. They poll in those states and they don't poll in other states. They do get out the vote efforts in those states and they don't in other states. The candidates spend time and get to know voters in those states and not others. But I think what you see when you go deeper into it is that it actually goes into policy considerations.
It would be more purely democratic if we got rid of the Electoral College. That sometimes simple democracy is not the best idea. The analogy that's sometimes used somewhat jokingly, but it has truth to it, is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Well, that's simple democracy. The sheep doesn't care that it got to vote, right? It's still on the dinner plate. If you were to get rid of the Electoral College, you would ensure that some people never matter again. You know, if you're a presidential candidate, why are you going to care about the needs of some person who lives in a town of 4,000 people when you can go to LA and get millions and millions and millions of people? What would it do if we said that people who live in big cities are the only people that are going to have the primary say in who the president is? This person has to represent the lobster fisherman in Maine, you know, the oil man in Texas, and the environmentalist in California. And so we need a system that somehow incorporates this diversity and allows more voices to influence the process. Well, because of the Electoral College, presidential candidates serve themselves best if they work to build coalitions and if they try to appeal to a wide variety of people. You can't be a Democrat who goes out to California and just gets, 80, 90% of the vote in California and become over-reliant on that, because once you cross 51%, you're not getting anything else out of California, right? You've already got those 55 electors, so it is more productive for you to go to another state. We have a system where you have to win simultaneous victories in multiple parts of the country, and the only way to get there is to build the biggest coalition you can. You win by reaching out to people who aren't quite like you. You win by listening to people who maybe disagree with you sometimes.
Four years ago, I was working at Jamba Juice, driving for Lyft and Uber, finishing my master's degree, and becoming a member of the Electoral College. When I started out being an elector, it was to have my name in the Library of Congress. It wasn't to stop a demagogue. And then when November 8th turned out the way it did, that required a change of plans, which we did accordingly. Michael BACA, right here. As a former United States Marine, as someone who served this country, as someone who appreciates this country, and who recognizes the faults in this country, recognizes that we can't elect someone who even has fascist undertones. When Secretary Clinton lost that night, so did Democrats' power to appoint judges, so did the Democrats' control. But the hope was that we could find a more moderate Republican, a Republican that's going to put their country above their party. My goal was to find 37 Republicans and to get all the Democrats so we could bypass the House of Representatives and then choose a president and a vice president.
We have received 8 votes for Hillary Clinton for president and 1 ballot which cannot be received. So we will ask the electors to nominate a replacement elector so that a 9th vote can be cast.
I was playing the game within the rules as the way they were written. I don't like those rules, but that's the way the game is. The constituents of Colorado, they elected me to vote for Hillary Clinton, but they also elected me to vote against Donald Trump. So I never once thought I was being faithless to the Constitution. If anything, I think we're faithful electors, right? We're being faithful to the Constitution as it was written. We're being faithful to our own conscience. We're being faithful to the people around us. I did feel that my rights were violated, and I didn't feel comfortable with the way Colorado had removed and replaced me under the current standing of the law. And so I did want to, fight back. If electors are merely just there to sign a piece of paper, why actually have physical people as electors? In 2016, there was a demagogue that got elected, and the political levers in this country did not allow any that reform to occur. So we've already experienced what it's like to have a demagogue become elected and electors be handcuffed and not be allowed to do their job. And that's why we shouldn't have the Electoral College and let this vote be decided on election day. I think there's a harsh reaction to the idea of faithless electors because people in this country want to believe in the democratic values that our country has been enshrined in. You have 538 people that elect the president. That violates our principles of democratic government. Do you really want 538 24-year-old Michael BACAs electing the president? That's kind of dangerous.
This kind of uncertainty about whether electors are going to actually follow the popular will introduces a whole other level of complication to a process that I think for many people is already very complicated. I think when people talk about the Electoral College as undemocratic, what they're actually saying is it's not majoritarian. And that is true. It's not a majoritarian system. But majority rule is only one principle that we applaud within our democracy. And we have lots of counter-majoritarian mechanisms. The history of majority rule in the US is not always a good one. And if we look at all of the swing states, we know that there are minority communities, especially the Black constituency, that has a lot of voting power within these swing states. If you look at Pennsylvania and Michigan, and now we can add Georgia to that, there is leverage that is gained as a result of these swing states containing a critical mass of the minority community that can actually shift the vote.
Everybody's vote should be counted equally towards determining this one person who represents them all. Black people are concentrated in high numbers in the South still, which is not a sort of accident of history. So where they are concentrated in high numbers, if they are not a majority, then their votes are wasted because you're giving all of your electoral votes to whoever wins the most votes.
On one end, Georgia's Republican Secretary of State. On the other, the President of the United States pressuring the Secretary to help overturn the election.
Georgia was a prime example. Once it was determined that those votes went towards the Democratic candidate, the president tried to use the Electoral College basically to throw those votes out. And instead of trying to court Black people in these votes, which the theory says he would do, he tried to make it harder to vote and even try to throw those votes out. So I just don't think in practice, it shows that people are going to be looking at Black people in terms of coalition. And so, in this time where we are rethinking and reckoning with race in our history of white supremacy and subjugation, we should also be really thinking critically about our electoral systems. And the Electoral College, I think, is one of the highest priorities that we need to be thinking about how to reform to make sure that it aligns with how we should be reviewing race in this country.
I actually think the Electoral College serves a purpose and is valuable, but the winner-take-all rule, which is what the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is trying to change, really has a perverted effect both on politics and policy. Look, I think unfortunately too many people in this country think their vote doesn't matter. And I think that has a horrible effect on politics in those states that are ignored, as well as public policy. The way the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact works is that when enough states that have 270 electoral votes or more adopt the National Popular Vote Compact at the state legislative level, they enter into this compact. And what the compact basically says is that they will then allocate their electors based on who casts the most votes in the national popular vote. You know, we elect 514,000 elected officials in this country, all of which who are elected by whomever gets the most votes in their respective districts. If we had a national popular vote interstate compact, the United States, for all practical purposes, would become a single member district where every voter in every state would be politically relevant, and therefore presidential candidates would have to pay attention as much as to the voters of California and New York, who today are completely ignored, as much as they do to the voters of Ohio, Pennsylvania, or Florida, who happen to live in battleground states. I think the national popular vote became a partisan issue because when Al Gore and Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote and lost their vote in the Electoral College, Democrats very quickly said it's the Electoral College that's the problem. As a conservative, I feel very comfortable that if we take our issues to the people of this country, that we can have a fair and competitive race, and I actually believe we would win. But at the very least, it would be a fair race that whoever gets the most votes would actually win the campaign.
I think the National Popular Vote Compact essentially is an attempt to do an end run around the Constitution, to accomplish through a pact among states what we can't do through an agreement. If it were successful, that for me would possibly be the worst of possible outcomes, because first, you are getting rid of the consensus building mechanism within the Electoral College. And in addition, you're doing it without bipartisan consent. And so that at a time when we know that our institutions are experiencing a lot of instability already, and pushing further in this direction would be more destabilizing. 2020, we saw an attempt to exert political pressure really in every area of election administration. We saw it exerted on election administrators, on state legislators, on senators, and finally on the vice president himself.
And tonight, President Trump is still insisting that the election was stolen from him, even as Congress is set to confirm Joe Biden's win.
I hope that our great vice president comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
It was one of the most alarming things to come out of the 2020 election, because things that had not been considered as a possibility before that are now a possibility, and they're on the table, and perhaps they will be used more effectively in the future.
I do think that the Electoral College contributes to that mood that we have of increasing division in our society, without which we can't have the country we want to have. We can disagree, but when people on both sides, ideologically and in terms of party, feel that the system is rigged, that the government is unfair, that people are elected in ways that are not really democratic, small d, our country's in trouble. It divides us and it weakens us, and it threatens this great American experiment.
Sometimes people don't completely understand why we have things structured as we have them structured, and to the degree that there's a lack of understanding, that does cause problems. But I would say that the solution to that is not to just start getting rid of institutions that have served us for centuries, but to try to do a better job of educating people about why we have them and what purposes they serve.
We as individual voters can determine our future and our destiny, and we don't need this archaic system of yesteryear to determine our path forward.
Hey, thanks for checking out CBSN Originals on YouTube. If you want to watch more documentaries, download the free CBS News app on your phone, tablet, smart TV, or any streaming device. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking down here. Thanks for watching.